Hello everyone, it's me Uncle John. Today I am going to read at 666 Nelson Mandela, page 29, chapter 5, The Rivonia Trial. In July 1963, the Rivonia Trial began. In 1962, a new law had given the courts the power to give death sentences for crimes of sabotage, and anyone who owned a weapon could be charged with sabotage. In court with Mandela and Walter Sisulu were Jovan Mbeki, Ahmed Kasrada, and Lionel Bernstein. Raymond Malaba, leader of the ANC and MK in the Cape Province, Elias Mortosoaledi and Andrew Mulangeri, and Dennis Goldberg, who was the youngest of the accused. During the 60s, the police began using torture while questioning prisoners. In 1963, Luke Smart, Sorwendel de Goodall, a member of the ANC, was the first political prisoner to die while police were questioning him. The Bram Fisher was one of the members of MK, was not at Lily's leave when the police surrounded the farm. He avoided arrest, and so he was able to lead the team of lawyers. Every day, the accused met the lawyers in order to prepare for the trial. The Bram told his friends that they were charged with sabotage and that the government lawyers were going to ask for the death sentence. As a prisoner, Mandela at first had to appear in court wearing his prison uniform. Later, he was allowed to wear a suit. At first, Winnie was not allowed to go to the trial, but later she was allowed to go, but forbidden to wear the Josa clothes in court. The both Albertina Sisulu and Caroline Mosoaledi were unable to go to the trial of their husband because they were in prison, arrested under the 90-day detention law. This law allowed the police to arrest any person suspected of a political crime, keep them in prison for up to 90 days without charging them with any crime or letting them see a lawyer. Hundreds of papers had been found by the police at Dillisley Farm, as well as maps which showed power station and railways, but they found no weapons. The most important person to speak against the accused at the trial was Bruno Mutolo. Mutolo had been a member of the ANC and a member of MK, but now he was helping the police. Mandela and the others found it difficult to believe that someone they had worked with was helping to send them to prison and possibly to death. From the beginning, the accused decided to accept the charge of sabotage. They wanted to use the trial to explain their ideas and to continue their struggle against apartheid. Much later, Katrada remembered right through the trial. Right from day one, he led us, he guided us. From the first day, he said, "This is a political trial." Mandela was the first to speak in court. He told the court that he was one of the people who had organized Umkhonto Sizwe. He explained to the court that although he was not a communist himself, the Communist Party was the only political group in South Africa which believed in the equality of Africans. Mandela spoke about the difference between the lives of black people and the lives of white people in South Africa. Because of apartheid, Africans experienced no dignity in their lives. But Africans wanted a fair share in the whole of South Africa. Above all, we want equal political rights, he said. This is what the ANC is fighting for. It's a struggle of the African people. Mandela spoke for over 4 hours. Then he put down his papers and turned to the judge, Justice Duwet. During his lifetime, he said, he had given himself to this struggle of the African people. He believed in a nation where all people live together with equal rights. If necessary, he was prepared to die for this. In London, Joe Slovo, who had escaped from South Africa just before the police discovered Ridley's leave, led the march to protest against the trial. Unable to return to his own country, the United Nations also asked the South African government to stop the trial. On 11th June 1964, the accused were found guilty, except for Lionel Bernstein, who was released. The night they prepared themselves for the death sentence. The next day, they entered the court for the last time. About 2,000 people waited outside the court. Mandela's mother had traveled all the way from Kunu and sat with Winnie in the crowded court. Mandela and the other accused stood before the judge. Justice, the wet face was serious, and he spoke slowly. Sentence in the case of all the accused will be one of life imprisonment. The Rivonia trial was over. The accused could hear the crowd singing Nkosi Sikelel in Africa as they were driven back to Pretoria prison. In the street, Winnie waited with the two daughters for the last sight of Mandela, but the crowd was too great. She went home to Orlando and put the children to bed. Only then did she sit down and cry. The prisoners were taken back to Pretoria prison. Every night in the prison, African prisoners sang freedom song. Before they slept, someone always shouted, Amandla, and hundreds of voices answered, Nguwatu. The night was no different, but in the middle of the night, Mandela, Sisulu, Mbeki, Laba, Moswaledi, Lanjeni, and Katirada were woken and taken from the prison. They were flown in an old army plane to Robben Island to begin their sentence. Only black prisoners were taken to Robben Island, so the white prisoner, Dan Goldberg, remained at Pretoria prison. Chapter 6. The Robben Island. It was winter when the prisoners arrived on Robben Island, and the cold winter wind blew through their thin prison uniform. The prison guards took them to a new building, specially built for political prisoners, separate from the ordinary African prisoners. There were about 1,000 African prisoners on the Robben Island, not all of them political. On one side of the prison was a wall 60 meters high. Guards with guns and dogs walked along the top of the wall. All the guards were white, and all the prisoners were black. The cells were about 2 meters square. When Mandela lay down, his head touched one wall, and his feet touched the opposite wall. The walls were at least 60 centimeters thick and always wet. The prisoners slept on the floor. They were given thin blankets, but in the winter, it was so cold that they kept their clothes on when they slept. Each cell had a small window covered with metal bars and double doors. During the day, the metal door was locked. During the night, the heavy wooden door was locked as well. Each prisoner was given a prison number, which was put on the door of the cell. Mandela was the 466th prisoner on Robben Island that year of 64. The number was 466, 64. The number that later became famous all over the world. The guards woke the prisoners at 5:30 a.m. After cleaning their cells, the prisoners went outside for breakfast, which was porridge. The Indian and colored prisoners had sugar and bread as well, and it was not until 1979 that all prisoners received the same food. If the cells were untidy, the prisoners were punished. Prisoners then worked outside, breaking stones without stopping until 12 o'clock, when one of the ordinary persons brought them some lunch. Work continued until 4 o'clock, when the guards took the prisoners back inside. Then, there they took a shower with cold seawater. This was the only time the prisoners were able to talk to each other. At 4:30 p.m., the prisoners returned to their cells, where they ate supper alone, porridge again, with perhaps a vegetable as well. Each night at 8 o'clock, the guards began walking up and down. He looked in at each prisoner through a small window. The one electric light in each cell was never turned off. Later, the prisoners were able to study in the evenings until 10 or 11 p.m. Families of the prisoners had to pay for the books, but many books were not allowed by the prison official. From the first day, Mandela protested about conditions on Robben Island, for example, about the short trousers which the African prisoners had to wear. A few weeks after their arrival on Robben Island, the guards brought 2 British newspapermen into the prison. They watched the prisoners as they worked and took a photograph of them. Then one of the prison guards called Mandela, and a photographer was taken of Mandela and Sisulu. They were the only photos of the prisoners during the long years on Robben Island. Political provinces could write and receive one letter of 500 words every 6 months. Sometimes the guard said, "We have a letter for you, but we can't give it to you." Often the prison official cut out so much of the letter that prisoners received only a few words. To wait for 6 months and then receive no letter was terrible. Letter was like the summer rain, Mandela wrote. To wait, just as the train could make flowers grow in even the driest land, so a letter would bring him new hope. Prisoners could also have one visitor every 6 months. Families of many of the prisoners lived far away, and it was difficult and expensive for them to travel to Robben Island. Some men spent 10 years or more on Robben Island without a single visitor. For their first visit to Robben Island, a journey of almost 1,600 kilometers, Winnie and Albertina Sisulu traveled together. Mandela talked to Winnie through a thick glass window, which had a few holes in it, where the guard stood behind him, and they listened. The conversation had to be in English or Afrikaans. They were forbidden to speak Xhosa, and they were only allowed to talk about family members. Suddenly, the guard called. Time up, time up. 30 minutes had passed. The visit was okay. Only Mandela walked back to his cell. It was 2 years before he saw Winter Night. Other political prisoners arrived on Robben Island. Some of these were MK men. They were also members of other freedom groups. For example, Zephania Motofeng, a member of the PAC, and Eddie Daniels, a colored member of the Liberal Party. Eddie met Mandela for the first time when he began his 15-year sentence on Robben Island in 1964. He became one of Mandela's greatest friends in prison. Mandela is one of the greatest men in the world, Eddie said afterward. He explained that when he was ill on Robben Island, Marty had taken care of him and cleaned his cell. Between 1961 and 1991, more than 3,000 African political prisoners were kept on Robben Island. The last ordinary African prisoners did not leave until 1966. One morning, the guards marched the political prisoners to the lime quarry, which was cut into the side of a hill near the prison. Prisoners worked at the time. And then worked at the lime quarry for the next 13 years. They had to break the rock in the quarry and then dig out the white stone and pack it onto trucks. Guards with guns watched the prisoners with whole while other guards walked about and shouted at them. At 12 o'clock, the prisoners walked down the hill. When they sat and ate their porridge, lots of seabirds flew in above them while they ate. White dust covered the prisoners by the end of the day. Tears ran down their faces because the bright sunlight shone on the white lime and damaged their eyes. Again and again, the prisoners asked for the sunglasses. But 3 years passed before a doctor agreed that the prisoners needed sunglasses to protect their eyes. On the way to the quarry, the prisoners passed the small white houses with a guard in front, where Robert Sobukwe was forced into it alone for 6 years. The prisoners were never able to see him or speak to him. He was alone for so long that in the end, he forgot how to speak. At first, the prisoners sang Shosha freedom songs as they walked in the quarry, but the guards soon stopped them. However, in the quarry, the prisoners were able to work in groups and they were able to talk together slowly. The prisoners organized and it became taught the history of the ANC, and Kathrada taught the history of the Indian struggle. In 1965, some officials from an international group visited Robben Island, and Mandela was chosen by the other prisoners to meet them. Mandela protested about the conditions on the island, asked for better clothes and food. He also asked in the cell to help the prisoners to read and study better. In the end, the prison officials agreed to give the prisoners long trousers and desks. Mandela continued to ask for better conditions, and later they were reading books. Later they were given chairs to sit on. While in prison, Mandela became known by the name of his Tembu people, Madiba, because of his dignity and In his confident way of speaking, Mandela became the leader who continued to speak for the others, although he always discussed things with Sisulu Bam, who was on the Robben Island for 10 years with Mandela, and said later, he really did not fear people at all. Even when Mandela was in prison uniform, he helped himself equal to anyone. Mandela secretly gave advice as a lawyer to the ordinary prisoners in order to help them with their problem. Notes were passed to him in boxes of matches or hidden in Ford. Then Mandela did meet the man he was helping, but sometimes a prisoner who was bringing food whispered thank you. Prisoners who were leaving Rotten Island hid messages from other prisoners in the clothes and passed them on when they got home. Political prisoners could never see a paper, but sometimes they secretly took the guard's newspaper. Once, Mandela was caught reading a newspaper in his cell, and he was put in a small cell for 3 days, alone and without food. Prisoners were often put in a small cell without food, and only racer to drink as a punishment. For example, they did not stand up when a guard came closely into the cell. Happening in South Africa, then political prisoners they passed these new laws onto the political prisoners by hiding Mandela and his companions learned that Bram Fischer had gone underground for nearly a year. Fischer avoided arrest, but in the end, he was caught and found guilty of sabotage. He was sentenced to life in prison, and he found the white political prisoners in Pretoria prison. In September 1966, as the prisoners walked to their lunch at the lime quarry, the ordinary prisoner bringing the food whispered, "The bare word is that the Prime Minister had been killed in Parliament by someone who worked in the offices there." Conditions on Robben Island became more difficult because the guards were angry about the death of the Prime Minister. John Bolster was chosen as the new Prime Minister. John Bolster was chosen as the new Prime Minister, and he continued Burwell's apartheid laws. When Verse was asked about Mandela, he said, anyone wants to talk to me, Mandela is the leader of Black South African people. In spring 1968, Mandela's mother visited him on Robben Island. She traveled more than 1,000 kilometers all the way from Kunu with Mandela's sister and Makgato and Makaziwi, his second and third children with Evelyn. His children had grown into young adults, but his mother looked thin and old. A few weeks later, Mandela received the news that his mother had died. Mandela was not allowed to go to burial, which added to his sadness. During the next 5 months, Mandela remembered the difficulties and suffering of his mother's life. He had put the struggle for freedom first, and because of that, he had been unable to make her life easier. In May 1969, the police walked Winnie at their home. Winnie was charged with attempting to restart the NAC. She was questioned by the night, worrying about what was happening to Winnie and their daughter. A few weeks later, one cold July morning, Mandela was called to the prison office and told that his eldest son had been killed in a car accident, aged 25. Again, Mandela was not allowed to attend the burial. Mandela returned to his cell and lay down. After the death of his mother and the worry about his wife, this news filled him once more with terrible sadness. It left a hole in my heart that can never be filled, he later wrote. The end.